Mark here for Mark 2.0. Brian's my co-host as always, and we are just thrilled because with the Canadian fires that was in the news recently, we have two experts up in Canada who's going to chime in on this. Ian, let's start out with you. Give us your background, what your work is like, and your synopsis of what's going on.
Sure. So I'm a professional engineer with like 30 years of experience. I work in the building industry. I'm what's called a commissioning agent. And I work basically in optimizing building performance. So I've been doing that all my career. I started off, in the manufacturing side of things, and I got all my hands-on experience. And now I, extend that to entire building systems. And I do a lot of work in energy efficiency. So I'm very familiar with, well, I'm basically, I could say I've got an expert knowledge in building energy performance. I give trainings across Canada to train other engineers and building operators. And so I got a master's degree also, related to that field. And so I'm pretty close to the subject of, climate change, because in my industry, essentially my point of view would be taboo. Like to even, so it's I go against the current, and only because in my work I've always tried to be very objective about what I do. I work in building science. I do testing, just like in real science, like in a real science. It is real science. I have to be objective about what I'm doing, and that's part of the success in my career, is because that's the way, that's the way I work. So getting to the topic here, so it's going to be tying into climate change. So as you've heard, as you know, it's all over the news. We have like over 180 fires. Maybe Gordon can tell the number that I've heard on the news is 180 fires happening almost at the same time in this late spring in northern locations in Canada. Okay. Now, anybody who lives in this climate and who's actually been in the forest at this time of year will tell you, it's just like to have a forest, even a single forest fire to happen is very rare. And I've never heard about it in my entire life in the spring. Usually forest fires will happen at late summer, after the summer, after a hot and dry summer. Well, then the conditions are more propitious to have a fire. And then that happens usually because campfires get out of control. People throw their cigarette butts out in the forest. And usually it's all, and of course, arson happens. So in the springtime, in the forest, there's literally still, in some northern locations, you will find that there's still snow in locations because it's shaded and never gets sun. It's still cold enough that it might actually have some residue of snow in the forest. If it doesn't at this stage, because we did have a warm week that penetrated up to the north, well, the ground is going to be very wet. So the probability of having even a single fire is unthinkable. Like at this time of year, earlier in the spring, we have floods. We don't have fires because the rivers are overflowing after the ice has melted. So as soon as I heard about these fires and the fact that, soon after someone was clever enough to actually capture the satellite images, which are available and no one has debunked it, that all these fires are happening almost like they're all happening at the same time. It's, what are the chances of that? I mean, so it's very unusual. Not even unusual. It doesn't even make sense. And from that point, my alarm bells went right off because, I knew what the narrative was going to be. Because let's take a step back. So climate change. Climate change is a terminology that we use now. And doesn't it sound a little bit absurd? Climate change? Of course, the climate changes. Who could argue against that? Right? So they used this catch-all phrase and they transformed it from what was called global warming, right? You remember that early on they were calling it global warming because that all stemmed from the from Al Gore's famous Inconvenient Truth, or whatever he called it, where he was proposing that CO2 concentrations were increasing and was causing global warming, and that we were approaching catastrophic, temperature. So we're going to raise up so fast that the ice would melt, the oceans would rise, we would have catastrophic, conditions. So that set off and all this was predated by, it wasn't the beginning of the, let's say the climate change discussion. It went back much earlier. Actually, it was a Canadian, Morris Strong, that was actually part of the initial formulation of this narrative. But let's just focus from the point of Al Gore and his Inconvenient Truth, talking about CO2, and his famous chart that he put on that showed the chart was the size of a wall. And he would show this relationship between temperature and CO2. And he was trying to show the world that when the temperature increases, the CO2 was increasing. However, there was a grave flaw in that presentation. It's the other way around. Okay. And you talk to any real scientist that's on the subject, and the general trend is that, think of it just like as the temperature increases, well, the vapor pressures, there's more possibility for vapor pressure to come out of the ocean, and there's more possibility for, CO2 in the air. So so that's the way it goes. It's like you have a temperature increase and then you might have more CO2, and so he created this whole narrative that's been, so what happened? Why did they change it to climate change? Well, they found out that over the past decade or so, it wasn't following the predictions that was coming out of the IPCC, the International Panel of Climate Change. These guys are the biggest hacks ever. They completely distorted. They never came out with any real proper science. And anybody who was of any experience in meteorology, climate science, they actually ignored their advice and just went with the recent PhDs that graduated and gave them full reign to write whatever. And then he would come up with these models that were not only unrealistic. So here's something interesting. How far in advance can they actually predict the weather? They don't even get it right within 10 days, right? So now they're trying to predict 20, 50 years. Give me a break. And their models were incredibly skewed. And then they could just, skew it the way they wanted, and just to show, oh, look at this scenario, like the temperature's going to raise up 5 degrees in the next 50 years, something absurd like that. So what happens, it wasn't following the way they planned on it, so the temperatures actually, and in fact, there's been enough, of real scientists out there that come out and talk about it and present the real data. When you look at a longer period of time, the actual climate temperatures are only gradually increasing since the Middle Ages, because we're in an interglacial period. And in fact, we had higher temperatures in the 30s when you had the Dust Bowl than we do now, right? So they had to change, they had to rebrand it, right? So that's what these guys do. When it doesn't work according to the way they want, they kind of rebrand it. And they came up with this idea of climate change, catch-all. Okay, so, but they're still jumping on CO2 as the toxic, greenhouse gas that is going to, curse us all, because we're going to be in the future, we're going to be in an infernal conditions because of rising CO2. It is the most absurd notion, and it's so laughable. Like, give me any of these guys and can just destroy their argument in a single, like, 2 words almost. Just the fact that the CO2 levels in the atmosphere are low enough, that so low, like 0.04%. That's the global amount. So oxygen takes up 21%, carbon dioxide takes up 0.04%. Humans estimated about 0.03% of the 0.04, so it's actually 0.0012%. So when you present that, it's like, how in the hell could we possibly ever have an impact on okay, so that part is easy to debunk. But going to another point is that, is CO2 really dangerous for us? Is it really? If you ever listen to Patrick Moore, I really encourage you. You know who Patrick Moore is? Patrick Moore, Moore.
He sounds familiar.
Okay, so he's one of the co-founders of Greenpeace. He is a man you want to listen to. And he's not part of that because, you know, Greenpeace any longer, because, you know, they were hijacked by the same type of agenda, right? And boy, does he just lay it out like, you know, he just puts it out in plain terms with all of his experience. There's no one in the world that could like refute what he is saying. He's just so articulate, calm, you know, presentation. So the idea that CO2 is dangerous is absurd. So do you know what the current concentration is, average concentration in the atmosphere? These are numbers I want to throw out so that if you ever have a discussion with people, at least, you know, the people that are listening are going to have a basic idea. So the average concentration, and, you know, it varies between if you're in a country or, you know, countryside, or if you're in an urban environment, but let's say 400 parts per million, 450 parts per million in heavy urban environments. Okay, so here's another question. So remember that number in a greenhouse. Have you ever worked in a greenhouse before? If you have, okay, do you know what the optimal CO2 level is for you know, in general, yield for having an optimal yield of whatever you're growing in a greenhouse? 12 up over 1,000 up to 1,200 parts per million. Okay, so right, just that point alone, so
triple.
Yeah. Triple, exactly. So, you know, in other words, the plants love carbon dioxide. It's part of the photosynthesis process. They need it. And here's something that's really ironic. Now, you know, they want to reduce carbon dioxide, right? They call it decarbonization. I mean, it's just another way of saying we want to remove humans from the earth. I mean, we're carbon-based creatures. They're telling it straight to our faces. Decarbonization, right? So they want to actually reduce. And when you listen to like psychopaths like Bill Gates in his TED talk, he talks about, you know, a simple formula that he presents and say, well, how are we going to reduce CO2? And of course, he puts the people as one of the variables. And he says, well, if we look at reducing the population, we'll be able to, you know, possibly get the levels of the concentrations down. You know, he wants to even target 0, okay? Which is that if you go below 180 parts per million, basically you can say goodbye to humanity. We won't be able to feed ourselves unless we, you know, have massive amounts of greenhouses that we inject CO2 into to grow our food. Because below a certain threshold, plants will die because they need to have a certain constant, you know, base level, minimal level of CO2 to grow. So, and here's another irony. Okay, when you lower we have lower CO2, the plants need more water. Okay, as part of their process. So isn't that ironic? They want to reduce the CO2, but now you have to increase your irrigation level. So now you're using a lot of water resources. It's like, you know, it's so backwards. And, you know, in fact, they have shown that the actual greening of because of the increase of CO2, there in fact is an increase in green areas in very arid areas around the planet, including around the Sahara Desert. Now, I've heard this. I haven't seen the science, but I've heard it from enough references that it seems like it's credible and it's a fact. So we're going in the right direction if we're actually increasing the greening of the planet. So here they are, the moment after these fires popped out suddenly, 180 across the country at the same time, you know, like, if you want to even believe that that's impossible, that it was done by natural, you know, causes.
In fact, if you don't mind my saying so, CBC Radio said that there were actually 400 known active fires, and 180 to 200 are actually the ones that are completely out of control.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that, Brian, because I
Yeah.
wasn't exactly sure of the numbers, and I knew it was. I didn't want to exaggerate the numbers, but now you've given those. So and
In a year, there's like 2,200 wildfires. Yeah. Now, yeah.
and
So.
they're trying to show that this is like some. Well, first of all, it's completely unnatural, and actually, when you look at the trends of the forest fires for even since to 1950, and this data is available from the Fraser Institute in British Columbia, which has the actual number of forest fires, it's gone way down. It's gone way down since the 1950s. There was a few years in the 80s that it spiked, but after that, it's been down. So there's absolutely no trend to show that there's actually increase of natural fires, right? So, so the day after, in the House of Parliament, I was listening to the question period, and they were going at this narrative like crazy. They were hammering away, and because our Canadian government is trying to impose actually a carbon tax on the carbon tax, right? And it's I suspect, I'm hypothesizing that they're actually preparing also for a fall election, very possibly, that they're trying to set up a narrative so that they can try to recapture their lost seats based on the narrative of climate alarmism. But that's a bit more of a hypothesis. But the fact that they're jumping on this narrative, just like you have people in politics, like the Democrats, that are also jumping on this, because there's been cities in the states, in the northern northeast in particular, that have been apparently hit by the smoke from the fires. Although the color of the smoke seems suspiciously like it's like orangey color that's in those cities. So there's some issues there might be about that. But so that's my summary of all of the situation. So I've taken up a bit of time, and I'll let you guys like chime in. Gordon, I'm sure has something to say about it.
Sure.
If you'll just excuse me for one moment.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Gordon, give us
Hang on until he gets back. Hang on until he gets back. Oh, okay. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
So you want my little bio? I just retired from the Canadian military in June of 2021. And I'll give you three guesses as to the reason why I'm no longer in the military. I was in the communications branch. My education, and went to York University, studied political science with other studies focused on the humanities. I do not have Ian's technical or scientific background. But with that being said, I think everyone would agree that in today's world, science has been politicized. And the entire climate change debate is not about science. It's a political argument. It's not a scientific argument. The one point I bring up, you talk about, Ian was talking about talking points and what to bring up with people. What I always I ask people, what's the concentration of CO2, of carbon in the atmosphere? What does it represent? We've got nitrogen, we have oxygen. How much is carbon? And typically people will tell me, 6%, 8%, 20%, 30%. They have no idea. And it's a trace element. It's 0.2 or 0.3. Ian probably knows.
0.04%.
0.04. Like, it's ridiculously small.
Yeah.
But what to your point, Ian was making the point that, of course, climate changes. We know this historically. And I invite anyone to go on to and do it themselves. Just grab your phone and type in medieval warming period. From 950 AD, or the Common Era, if you prefer, from 950 forward for about 300 plus years, the climate in Northern Europe warmed to such an incredible extent that the ice sheets on Greenland pulled back. And that's why the Vikings named it Greenland, because it was a green land. And they actually went and they established settlements. Sorry for my dog. Down. They established settlements in Greenland, and those settlements thrived for 200 to 300 years. And then their settlements had to be abandoned because of climate change. We went into a period called the Little Ice Age that started around 1300, went into the 1700s, maybe into the early 1800s, depending on who you're reading. And again, the climate change, and I always joke with people and I go, so what did the Vikings do that was warming the planet? Were they using plastic bags? Did they have too many farting cows spewing methane into the atmosphere? This is my take. This is a political agenda, and it's all about branding statements. It's all about fear. I read an article yesterday that published, I think it published on Friday, and it's by BNN Bloomberg, which is Business News Network. Bloomberg is mainstream as you can get, and they were interviewing a Yale University psychologist, and she was saying it's really critical not to be alone with your climate anxiety, terror, and grief. The number one feeling that people report to me when I ask, how do you feel about the climate emergency? They say, I feel so alone. No one understands how bad it is. My friends don't understand. My family doesn't understand. They feel alienated and separate from other people because of this knowledge and emotional experience that they have. So what they are programming the population to believe is that if you are terrified, if you're anxious, if you're afraid of climate change, that is the response they want you to have. They want to turn the entire population. They want us all to turn into little Greta Thunbergs, you know, and saying, I want you to feel the terror that I feel every day. That's what they're aiming for, because then if they can get us scared, they cut off the ability to, what Ian is engaging in is critical thinking. When you're afraid, you don't think critically. And having just come through the COVID era, people did not critically think because they were scared to death of the deadly coronavirus. Everywhere you turn, the deadly coronavirus. And if you thought critically, if you live in my area of Ontario, not that I needed one, but you couldn't get a haircut, right? No haircuts allowed, unless it's a TV show or a Netflix series or a movie.
Wow.
And then it's okay. You can get a haircut in a movie. And people did not, because of their degree of fear. And we need to ask questions. Ian raised some beautiful ones about the fact that in the spring, I've lived in Quebec. Ian lives in Quebec now. Quebec is something of a hot spot. There are three primary areas in Canada being affected, Alberta being one, Quebec being another, and Nova Scotia being another. Alberta is basically north of Wyoming, Montana. Quebec is north of upstate New York, Vermont, New Hampshire. And Nova Scotia is north and east of Maine. And so you have these three hotspot areas. And there's a gentleman who has a YouTube channel. His name is Peter McIsaac. And he's a retired civil servant. He worked in forestry for the Ministry of the Environment in Nova Scotia. And his specialty was fighting forest fires. And he enumerated three things that have happened on his YouTube channel. Number one, they had what he refers to as heli-attack crews that would go in by helicopter, because the biggest thing, we have forest fires. They happen, a lightning strike, you have dry timber, whatever. You need to get at it fast before it blows up and gets out of control. And so what they would have is this heli-attack crew would go into remote locations, not easily accessible by road, and they would fight the fire and put it out before it blew up. That's one, and they cut that. The heli-attack crews were eliminated, axed. They also did that in Alberta. Alberta had rappel teams. They axed the rappel teams. You want to have forest fires, the best way to make sure they blow up, Brian, you were talking 480-ish in total, with 140 or so being deemed out of control. Is that right? Something like that?
Yeah, 400, about half of them are out of control.
Right. And so you want a forest fire to go out of control? Just mount an ineffective and slow response to suppressing it. And then you can have forest fires blowing up. Then you can have upstate or New York City and Philadelphia and the industrial northeast of the U.S. inundated with smoke. In my area, I could taste the air earlier, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of last week. It was stung the eyes, not horrible, 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 but bad enough that everyone knew what was going on. But I think the biggest thing that we need to do at this stage, I almost feel that Canadians, Americans need to get out in front of this. By the time they start introducing emergency mandates, it's too late.
Mm-hmm.
Americans, Canadians need to get out in front of this now and let them and say right now, no to a climate emergency. Because right now in the United States, Joe Biden is under pressure from the likes of Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and others. The so-called progressive left is leaning on Biden to make a declaration of a climate emergency. The same thing is being bandied about here in Canada. We now have the World Health Organization updating their 2005 international health regulations. They could declare climate a health emergency, and their updated regulations would allow them not only to make recommendations, but to impose binding measures on member countries like Canada, the United States, and most of the Western developed world. This is the kind of thing that is coming down the pike. This is what is planned. And it's not going to, I have my own YouTube channel, and I put out a video on April 30th. 3 predictions. My number 1 prediction was that by this summer, in the summer of 2023, we will see the declaration of a climate emergency. And that was before the wildfires started. At the time, I was speculating, what would it take? What would they need? And I said that they would need, I would imagine, I was imagining back then, they would need a catalyst. They would need an event. And I said, it could be forest fires. It could be a catastrophic storm of some description.
Hurricane, you name it.
Yeah, typhoon, who knows? But I think we're up against it hard, because the ability of governments and media working in tandem, coordinated by agencies like this World Economic Forum, to inundate the mass of the population with fear porn and scare the hell out of them and turn us all into Greta Thunbergs, Thunbergs, however you say her name. And then at that point, we've lost the game, because you cannot trying to talk to someone who's frightened. There was a woman in St. Catharines, Ontario during COVID who opened up her hair salon because she was going to lose her house. And she started filming people and saying, I'm in the motion picture industry now.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
And it was a beautiful move, but you should have seen the protests that came out against her. Yeah. She's going to kill us all.
Sure.
She's going to kill me. And that's what fear does. Fear robs a person of their ability to do what Ian did so brilliantly at the start. And that's to, wait a minute, Quebec in May?
Yeah, the north.
I lived in Quebec City for 3.5 years. You still have snow on the ground in Quebec City in May.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Brian. Looks like you want to say something.
No, I'm trying to fix my camera.
Yeah.
Blurring out will not focus on me. No, go ahead. Just keep talking.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the reason your camera is blurry is because of climate change. I can prove it.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. There we go.
That's the smoke.
Yeah, the smoke from Canada to Phoenix.
The Canadian wildfires.
Go back to Phoenix.
Impacting you all the way out in Phoenix, Arizona.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're still in Phoenix, right?
I am.
Oh, yeah.
I am. Yeah.
One thing that I wanted Gordon or Ian to take this, possibly Gordon, is you always quote things from the top shelf authoritative mainstream news. Well, I don't know when it was. Maybe I think it was like a year ago or something. On Good Morning America, they had the mayor of Cleveland, Ohio, come on talking about these 15-minute cities. Can you explain what a 15-minute city is?
You probably know this as well as I do, Ian, and
Yeah,
go for it. And
sure.
that's your background.
Oh, no problem. So, a 15-minute city is a concept that you're living in a neighborhood where everything is within a 15-minute walk. All the services that you require, whether it's medical, whether it's schools, whether it's the barber, whether it's your groceries, whether it's a cinema. So the idea is like, hey, we're going to set up these 15-minute cities so you don't have to you don't even have to drive your car. Wonderful. And in fact, why don't you just stay in that area? Because otherwise, if you use your car and go out too often, your carbon footprint is going to start to increase. So the 15-minute city concept has been floated around for a long time, but now it is being implemented. And Oxford, England, is one of the first official 15-minute cities that has, in which they literally put they only have a few entrances and exits to that area, where they actually blockade many of the access around this city, because I guess the emergency services are contained within it, so it's not an impedance, let's say, in terms of an emergency. And people are, first of all, it starts off as a recommendation, and now it's come to the point where you're not allowed, if you drive more than 100 times outside of this 15-minute city, they will issue you a ticket of a certain amount, okay, to penalize you for your bad, you're adding to your carbon footprint. So these 15-minute cities are being experimented and set up in various areas. But here's something interesting. Over the past several years, for example, in Montreal, I noticed a trend, even before the 15-minute city, concept really came out into the open, that there's an extraordinary amount of residential buildings that are being built, like condos and apartment buildings. It just seems like there's this constant construction going on, not commercial buildings, but like all these like tall, like almost like skyscraper apartment buildings. I've actually done commissioning work on one of the major ones in downtown Montreal, and everything is digitized in that building, by the way. Even you don't use a traditional key. They have an access key to get into your apartment. And I actually asked when we were doing the commissioning on the doors, I said, is it possible that these doors could be locked so that they can't even open the latch to get out? The guy kind of paused when he answered me. He said, well, yeah, it should be okay. There shouldn't be a problem for that. So in other words, there's a potential that they could literally lock you into your apartment. Okay. With these types of new electronic, these door access that you normally have maybe in a high security building or in an office building. Now they have them in apartment buildings. So the 15-minute city concept is also going to be tied in with what they would call a smart city, and they have actually a template or an example of that in downtown Toronto, in the harbor side. There is an area that they're actually doing a test, a pilot, where they have everything is monitored, basically. Wow. It's like the extreme example of monitoring, so they're trying to do a pilot test as a smart city. So all these ideas of smart city, smart cars, everything's going to become smart, but the humans are going to become more dependent, and that's the idea. So 15-minute cities are tied into this overall idea of herding people into them, okay, filling them up. Now, the forest fires actually, because it's not just for one purpose that we have, that they're going to use these forest fires. It's not just for climate change narrative, but it's also to create a fear among people living in those areas that say, well, this is getting close to my house now. Am I going to risk it? People, maybe there are people actually live in the country are usually sturdy and robust, and they don't not worried. But maybe in the minds of these planners, they're thinking that this is going to create a sense of fear, and they're going to be able to herd more people into these cities, and then eventually into 15-minute cities within the city. And that's part of the agenda. Herd them in there. You're not going to own property. You're not going to own anything. You're going to be very happy not to own anything, according to Klaus Schwab and the Great Reset. And you're going to have a digital currency, So that'll make things very convenient. You can just go in and literally it'll be a chip in your hand like they're doing in Sweden, and you can just pay for your groceries just by tapping your hand to the little digital reader, and the digital ID. So you're going to also have all your records concentrated. How convenient is that? Have all your records onto one, your medical records, your financial records, perhaps all your other histories that they can put on it, so that they can see you, like have an actual idea of who you are and where are you actually at this moment, and how much carbon are you using. Are you going, maybe you went on too many trips last year and you've exceeded your carbon limit, and I think we're going to have to just put a limit on to your on the goods that you can buy on certain things on trips. So you can't take a trip for a couple of years until you recover your credits on your for your excessive carbon footprint. So you can see where this is leading it, and it's not, I'm not making up any of this. This is all, like, they literally have white papers on this subject where they describe the conveniences of all these services, but they don't tell you that it's really the ultimate control system that they want to implement, and we're going fast and furious in that direction. Make no mistake about that.
I don't know how fast and furious myself. I think it's more 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, 4 steps forward, 4 steps back, 3 step, 1 back.
They're clumsy about it. They're clumsy.
I think you're both right. They would be going faster if they could, but we keep pushing them back.
Yes,
exactly.
They are going fast and hard as they can, and they would go faster if they could. But people, here's the interesting thing. It seems like they have the numbers, they have the support, and they have the edge. But the fact is, even in this gathering today, there's not one person here, and I don't know what this will even do to the YouTube algorithm, but there's not one person here who believes in climate change.
Oh, I do. I believe the climate.
No. You're not believing in what they're proposing. Yes.
No, I don't. I know.
Yeah. Well, you see that as a means of control. Bunch of hogwash, really. And once you get deep into that, you find out that this thing where they're lying about what's going on doesn't just affect our climate, it affects our food, our economy, our very communication and education. We're in some pretty shit now, guys, actually. And I think some disruptors have become so disruptive, my friends, that we're really getting to the edge of push coming to shove, for lack of a better term. So let's not mince words. You don't have to here, Ian.
No.
So what I'm so you're an engineer, and I'm sure these your education served you well when you're making buildings energy efficient. And I was going to start to ask you, what is the cutting edge technology today in building energy efficiency? But really, once you went off in that direction against climate change, really, I think you set the tone for this whole discussion. And I don't mind it at all, because I think this fire is weird. It's really, really unusual. It's too big, too fast. And I think what Gordon said, causing having a state of emergency, predicting that before, eventually they were going to get to some goddamn emergency. Eventually, I didn't think it would come this fast. You were pretty good predicting this one, Gordon, but this is kind of different. This is not. This is not like
declared it yet. They haven't declared it yet.
No.
But that's a good one. That I don't know how long and how this thing can burn. Does anybody have any idea at potentially how long and the potential damage, worst case scenario?
I think it's gone down quite a bit, because there's certainly in Montreal, it's cleared up. Like we had last week, we had a serious smog throughout the week. Gordon was explaining, it was enough to sting your eyes, but it's cleared up. We don't see those red suns, in the evening. So this is, first of all, I don't think, let's put the hypothesis out there, okay? And we don't have necessarily any evidence, except in Alberta, of course. This Premier Daniel Smith is calling it more likely arson because they're investigating several individuals that have been involved in numerous arson. So she's the only premier in Canada, or the only politician that's actually talking about the possibility of arson. But the fact is that in order, like, say they are trying to provoke these fires, well, you see, my hypothesis is that they might have thought that they could get these fires started, and there's still some that are out of control, but given the conditions in the forest themselves, it's too wet. Like, they're gonna end up burning out. And I think that's part of, like, I don't think they could maintain the level of intensity. Let's say there is someone actually deliberately starting these fires, to maintain that level of intensity to try to keep these fires going. And there was this drone footage. I don't know if you saw it, and I will not declare whether it's true or not. But they actually, apparently a drone got into a zone that was restricted, that shows planes literally, dousing the forest with fire. Okay.
Wow.
But yeah, it's been circulating through. I do not say that it's, I don't know if that's from something completely different, or if it was video, photoshopped, but no one's coming out to say it's not real as well so far. I haven't seen any debunking of it. So I think that they run a risk if they're going to continue those types of activities, that people are now aware. Like, a lot of people are aware, and there's some crafty and motivated people out there that can send out drones and keep an eye on things as well. So they just get any more footage of that, it could bring them down if there was enough evidence. Plus, there is ongoing investigations now from the various forestry management, or even the RCMP, or in terms of if this was an arson, a case of arson. And so and the stats show that the majority of the fires are actually set by arsons when they looked at it, in fact.
Wow.
In forests.
That sucks. Unbelievable. What motivates this? I mean, what motivates all of this? And what are they trying to accomplish? Why start a bunch of fires?
Well, I think Gordon certainly, hit the nail on the head there. Is like, they're trying to create a crisis, and it's to try to, like, say, create a hurricane or other major, destructive, types of storms is obviously, almost in the realm of science fiction. But forest fires is something. It's like, let's put our shoes in, let's say, those planners, those globalists that are saying, we got to push this this climate change. It's like, it's stalling. We got to get ahead of this. And what is the best way that we could, create fear into the population? And, they probably had a brainstorming and said, hey, forest fires in northern Canada, no one's around to see what's going on, right? And plus, if we choose the right day with the wind conditions, it's just going to blow south. And so we can blow it into cities in the US, and then we've got it. Like, it's going to be a narrative that we've been already talking about, because they already talked about, with the forest fires in California and so forth. They always try to blame, the climate change. So this is what an opportunity. I believe it's a manufactured crisis. And, and they always say, we're going to try to take, don't let a good crisis go to waste. Let's take full advantage of it. And that's even what Orquez, what's her name?
Ocasio-Cortez.
OAC.
She even said that.
AOC, whatever.
Yeah, OAC.
What's funny to me is when they take planes and they pump out a chemtrail that's supposed to, I don't know, dim the earth or something.
Yep.
All in some attempt to cool the earth, thereby manipulating the weather, thereby manipulating, they're actually doing, what they're protesting. I mean,
yes. Well,
It's
the thing is, like I
it's
said,
climate change, and wouldn't the climate actually change due to stuff like that?
well, what happens is when it's a temporary effect. But for example, last week, the original weather in Montreal was supposed to be relatively sunny, but it was cloudy for most of the week. Temperatures were cooler, so it gives you an idea of when you have a large volume of smoke that enters the atmosphere. And of course, we've seen this in historical examples of when we've had massive volcanoes, like in Indonesia in the 1800s. It basically created an extended winter that went through a summer. Like they had a year-long winter, and that's that's an effect of natural effect on the climate. And they use the same principles in geoengineering, all in the context that, oh, we're going to experience, we're going to have these out of control temperatures in the future, so we got to create a global dimming effect. And so they've been doing these programs for years and years, but it goes a little bit deeper than just weather modification. It's a rather extensive subject. If you've never heard of Dane Wigington from geoengineeringwatch.com, this gentleman is the absolute warrior, like truther in this movement. He is so well referenced, so well researched, so articulate. And if you go on his website, geoengineeringwatch.com, you will see so much evidence of it. And he, goes into much. He actually has a weekly report as well.
So you know his work well.
I do. In fact, I had been studying it for some time. Like, I had been involved in geoengineering subject. That's one of the early subjects after, like, 9/11. 9/11 was the first one that I got extensively involved, being a building engineer, understanding structural engineering. Then I became a member. I looked at the evidence and the data and everything. I said something is up with that. I joined Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, and that was like one of the first, like, say, torches that I carried to, like, try to get the message out with my credentials. But geoengineering was a quick second, following in that, because a friend one day told me, early 2000s, like around 2005, let's say, he told me this idea of chemtrails. I said to him, Ron, like, that seems too exotic. He said, just look in the sky. If you ever see an X in the sky, basically that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
And that's the first time I had a window office, and I had a great view of the sky. And then one day I looked out, and this X appeared in the sky. It just didn't make any sense with the routes, the air routes in Montreal. Forget it. Didn't make any sense at all. And then I realized that there's something. And then I started to research the subject. And then I caught on to Dane Wigington. I actually had communications with David Keith. I don't know if you know who he is, but he's the main science nerd who actually comes from Canada, but I think his posting is in, I think it's MIT. And he's kind of like the science guy that's trying to push this subject into the general population. And, so I actually had personal communications with him to challenge him on this idea. Now, here's something so it's all tied together, right? I said the subject of geoengineering is not just about weather modification. There's a lot of nanoparticles, aluminum nanoparticles, barium, and strontium, and other, like, sometimes exotic, particles that come out of these, that are sprayed. But one of them is like the nano aluminum particles, which is very common, right? So what happened is that these particles are like destroying ecosystems, and they, he proposes to inject a sulfur into the air like a volcano to cause this dimming effect. But actually, they're doing all these other particles, and what happens is that also creates a lot of problems for health in terms of increased levels of dementia, neurological problems. The forest the soil becomes contaminated with aluminum particles, and then the microbes start to die, and all these things. There's a lot in this subject. I just, like, it's a huge subject. And how does it tie into climate change? Well, they they want to use that again as a way to not only just like control the temperature, the weather, but to actually control the population. They have ways that they can do that. It gets the rabbit hole gets deep, and I probably won't go any further on that subject because there's so much involved. But may I recommend that you go to his website, and I can post it to you later. Mark, I'll send
Sure,
it to you.
yeah.
I
I
invite
know
you.
actually everything you're talking about. I've gone all the way down into these holes. I'm
Okay.
a longtime info warrior,
Oh, yeah.
and you know, I mean, the
Good.
9/11 thing was, you know, I mean, you're a structural engineer. You know, metal doesn't get that hot. Things don't shear off at 45-degree angles. It's just
Yeah.
sheer logic. You know,
Yeah.
it's ridiculous. You know,
Yeah.
but to this day, we couldn't push it through, could we? The damn it, god damn it, the
The degree of
fucking truth never came out, and
the
I'm
degree-
so pissed about that to this day. Ian.
the degree, Brian, that they can distract the population. Think about everything going on right now, and what do people care about? They care about Donald Trump's indictment, or they care about the NBA playoffs. Who's gonna win the NBA?
Good point.
Who's gonna win the Stanley Cup? These side matters that really have no tangible impact. Juvian was the name of a Roman poet back 2,000 odd years ago when the Roman Empire was collapsing in on itself, and he said two words: bread and circuses. Keep them fed, keep them entertained, and do whatever you want to the population. They're not going to revolt. You know, people watch Building 7 go down like a giant hand came down from heaven and pushed it down. Classic example of a controlled demolition.
They reported its demolition too early too. That
Yeah,
was
20
funny.
minutes early by British.
And I saw it live when it happened. But listen, this is not stopping. It's not even summer yet. We're in late spring.
Yeah, that's a good
June
point.
21 is all we need. And they'd already prepared us for this. They had said, we told you that climate change was bad, and now look what's happening. Look what's happening in Alberta and Quebec and Nova Scotia. Look at what's happening to the Northeast. We told you so. That's what they're saying to everyone.
Without even a catalyst moment to explain what the fuck they're talking about. They're just like saying, see,
We told
everything's
you,
on fire and this is all your fault.
and just wait, because let's get into June, July, and let's get a 2-week stretch where it genuinely is hot. And things do have an opportunity to dry out. I have a friend in my network who's also, he has a degree in forestry, and he says that Canada for decades now has done an incredible job at suppressing forest fires. You've never heard of this before. And so what happens, his point, Brian, is that trees die, they fall down, they're dry, they are tinder. They're waiting for, and he said there's two ways you can deal with it: either have a forest fire and let it burn, or do a controlled burn. But all I'm saying is that we're early in the game. When I made the prediction April 30th there'd be a climate emergency, I said for the summer of this coming summer, we'll see it. So we've got a long way to go, and there can be a lot more fires, and all they need is to have a slow and effective response, and they can blow it up.
But you were predicting something, not necessarily a fire, just something.
Right.
No, not at all. Yeah.
Because they're hysterical on the subject. That's why you made the prediction, right? Because of their ridiculous hysteria.
Yes.
When you said they were going to say it was something, you said you were thinking it was going to be something that they were concocting like they do, like making shit up like they do all day.
Well, and the thing is, what they can do now in today's world, because of AI, because of bots, because of algorithms on social media platforms, especially like Twitter, they can create a digital illusion of a narrative. And they can have 10,000 people all talking about, oh my God, the climate, the Canadian wildfires, we have to have they can create this illusion
Good point.
of and they're doing the same thing with the whole LGBTQXYZ elemental P stuff. They create this digital illusion of a narrative, and it scares people into speaking out.
Mm-hmm.
Because they have this perception that there's this narrative. And now in Canada, we have now Bill C-11 and Bill C-18, which have been signed into law. And there's the very real prospect that if I go to share this video on my Facebook platform, that the government's going to say, you're not allowed to share that, you are guilty of thought crime.
Yeah.
However, what I think we've seen also lately too, which is a true blessing, is the power of the people and the power of the dollar. And when you deny a certain beer company your money or a certain department store your dollar, they take a hit to the tune of tens of billions of dollars.
But
so
the point I would make to that, Brian, is I'm going to tell you, they don't care.
I was going to say, it's like they're going to sacrifice their bottom line to get this, to push this corporate
there
agenda.
is a bigger agenda at play here than mere dollars and cents. They already have more money than they could ever spend in 100 lifetimes. They've got plenty of money. What they want is power. What they want is control. What they want is all four of us and everyone like us to be the digital property of our corporate masters, and the government's there to hold the leash. You were talking to Ian about 15-minute cities. Sounds like a great idea. You know, hey, not a bad idea. Everything within 15 minutes, so long as it's not compulsory. But they're already building a test city in Saudi Arabia where they are going to mandate that it's not going to be a city. It's going to be a prison. It's going to be a prison.
Yeah.
A line. Yeah, it's called the line. It's like it's spread across the desert, you know, like something like 250 kilometers long and maybe about 500 meters wide or something like that. So they call it the line, and everything is going to be built in, like all your services. So in other words, it's going to be your ultimate 15-minute cities, but in sections throughout you know, this and outside of that is like the desert. It's extremely like dystopian. Like it's the ultimate dystopian, like
like living on Mars or something.
Yeah.
Well,
Exactly.
you live in Ian lives in downtown Montreal. I'm about 4 hours away from him, 4 and a bit. He's been to my place in very rural Ontario. If you go to the eastern edge of the GTA, I'm about an hour away from that eastern edge. And I'm going to say it. They want this area depopulated. They want to herd the massive humanity, Canada, US, Europe. They want to herd us into cities, to larger
Toronto, you name it.
Much easier to keep a constant, have that all watching eye on us, you know. And
how do you make the zombies smart again? No, I mean, how do you fix this problem? Because you have to turn on some kind of light in so many people. The one thing I did like about the people doing this thing with their dollar, I think what it did show them is a good number of people who oppose them, and it's a big number.
Exactly.
That was also, I think, a shock to them. I think it was, or they wouldn't have did. I don't think they intended to lose those tens of billions. Yeah, they can take the hit, Gordon. I know they can. They can redirect their money, and even if they don't, I mean, so what? It's how many beers are out there. I mean, it's just
I agree.
shocking what we spend on beer. It's sad.
To your point, Brian, I do agree. Would they just as soon not lose billions of dollars? Of course.
But now moving forward, you think Coors is going to put somebody like that on their beer can? No fucking way.
Yeah.
The Blue Jays have just announced they're having a week-long Pride Festival.
The pitcher got fired for speaking out. Was it the pitcher?
Yeah, it was. I'm trying to remember his name now. Bass, Anthony Bass.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, he's a bit of a fringe reliever. He's got an ERA of about 4.5, so he's not exactly an all-star candidate.
Okay.
And people were saying when he spoke out against it, people were saying, "Oh, well, get rid of them. He's a loser anyway. Trade him, release him. You know,
Yeah.
trade him for a sack full of used baseballs." And Anthony Bass capitulated, and he issued a public apology.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I forgot to mention,
Sure.
I identify as transparent, and my pronouns are where and who.
Where and
There you
who? I
go.
saw that meme. That was great. That
Wow.
was great.
And on that theme, I identify as 7 foot tall, so I need all three of you to hunker down lower so that you affirm my identity,
Jeez.
because I do not
Yeah.
identify as 5'11" anymore. I'm 7 foot.
You know, just tying into that, because I say that also because I know if you saw the protests in Ottawa, just the past week, there was a rather tense standoff between the LGBTQ and the rest of the alphabet versus parents. Now, this was an interesting clash. Okay, this is where they're going to have a problem dealing with this, because the parents that were protesting, more than half of them were Muslims, and they were joined with Christians. Okay, so
Yeah.
the Muslims in their victimhood in for the left is very high up there. So how are they going to resolve that dilemma? They've got their two top players working against each other. You know,
Oh, we
so-
have a place called Dearborn, Michigan, and it's,
Exactly. I was going to
very
say that.
high. And I saw them absolutely destroy, the parent-teacher conference meetings in there, and I don't think they expected that at all. For Christians and Muslims to come together in this issue is pretty beautiful, I thought.
well, you see, this is where they're like, look, their plans are not going to be perfect, and actually, you're going to see how flawed they are when they keep trying to push these narratives. And I'm very encouraged when I do see these school board meetings and these parents coming out, and I'm very hopeful when I see that. And when I see this in Canada, it gives me hope as well, because it's going to bring like a lot of like the Christians and the Muslims are actually going to be united in the cause. And how can you fight against all they're saying, they were chanting is, leave our children alone, whereas the other ones were trying to say, trans rights are humans' rights. Well, no one's arguing that they have human rights, just stay away from our children. That's all. Like, go back to your clubs. No one had a problem with you before. Now you're coming in their face, and what's going to happen is the politicians are going to fuel that division, right? And they're doing that by saying, now the LGBTQ are now being threatened and menaced. We have to put in these new emergency security measures to protect them at their pride parades and so forth. And they're just going to fuel into that, right? But they're going to start losing that because of all the parents that are just saying, that's it. We had enough.
So, and then they weaponize the DOJ, and the FBI comes to your house, right? I know they're now that this is a whole new level that this has gone to as well recently. It seems like all these things have hit incredibly scary levels lately, simultaneously. So, gosh, gentlemen, what is going to come next? I mean, I'm just sitting here in horror, watching, shocked.
I'll end my comments with the three predictions I made. One, and this was April 30th. I said, one, there will be the declaration of a climate emergency sometime this summer. Number two, in the fall, there will be the emergence of a new variant of COVID, and they will have a jab all ready to go for it, and it will be mandated. And number three, there will be there's going to be more war. There's going to be an escalation of the Ukraine-Russia conflict, and with the possibility of China, Taiwan, the Middle East, goodness knows, but we're going to have a climate emergency. We're going to have a new COVID variant in the fall, and we're going to have war. And then you might want to add into that, look out for economic collapse.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Hmm.
So what should we be doing right now?
Well, I think
Have you heard the song On and On and On by ABBA?
I'm from the 70s. I grew up in the 70s. I know. Yeah. But,
Hmm.
but, uh, Ian, what are you doing to prepare?
well, you know, feeling a little bit helpless in terms of all these things happening. I do think about like I have like I look at where I can bug out. That's one thing for sure. It's a real possibility because Montreal's an island, and it's easier to lock down an island, right? They just close off the bridges if they really want to do something. Um, so I have different ways of going about this. One is I just live my life without fear, and I'm just ready to take on whatever comes my direction. That's one of my preparations. Number two, I try to just pass on information, have exchanges with people so that we try to keep the this grow this movement as much as possible. Number three, knowing that there is, I think the economic collapse is something that is very real. In Canada, we're getting
Sure.
like it's there. That's part of the agenda. They're just smashing us with, with the spending and the inflation and just the
Interest rate
rate. The
hikes.
Bank of Canada rate just increased. They're looking at the potential of adding like over a year, like $15,000 to people's mortgages, with that rate increase over the next, couple of years when they go back to, like say, renew their mortgage or whatever. So the economic collapse is a very real one. The war thing, I think, they're having difficulty because, for example, this they're trying to blame the Russians for the dam being blown up, but we know that that's like everyone's like, it's like, why would they go and shoot themselves in the foot? That sort of thing. So there's a lot of challenges there, but I'm more worried about what's happening with China and the U.S. That
Mhm.
one looks like a more like confrontational is building up there. Uh, I believe they are going to try to come out with the lockdowns, how to deal with that. Well, I think there's more people now. Like there's going to be a larger freedom movement, and people sometimes say, well, what's the purpose of these movements? Even they try to diss the convoy, the freedom convoy movement. No, I can make a lot of points to say how that has been extremely beneficial, and how for on many levels, and we need that. It's a way of like it's one of the tools in the toolbox. Putting pressure, getting people together, putting pressure on the actual MPs, whatever we can do. I mean, I don't believe in this system. I know that there's a whole alternative is like go to another, like let's get out of this system because there's no justice that's going to be attained in this existing system. That's one of the dilemmas, right? Uh, even recently there was a lady there in Winnipeg who was trying to get a organ donation, like, and because she didn't do the vax, she couldn't get it, the organ,
Hmm.
and so she went all the way up to the Supreme Court that refused her case
They
Hmm.
because she
refuse
didn't
to
take the
hear it.
jab. So I forget about our justice system. We got to be realistic, do
Mhm.
we? But we don't have enough people right now who understand the vision of getting out of this system, starting up, other, independent communities where we have, completely off, not off the grid, but we have our own ways of bartering, trading. We have our own services and everything. We rely more on natural law. I don't know. That's the more extreme case, but of direction. But practically speaking, I think we got to round up more people. If we get more people, like they're doing in France,
Yeah. Oh, yes.
if they're doing in France,
Mhm.
it's. I mean, they're literally they cut off the feeds from France. I noticed that because there was
Hmm.
every day they were coming out. But have you noticed that it slowed down? It hasn't slowed down in France. I'm telling you, it is still going. They're still on fire on the streets. And we can take that as a model because when you get enough threshold of people,
Mhm.
we outnumber them. And that's one of the ways that we have to kind of tie into that.
And then
So
what? And then what? You know what? It's hard to say it out loud. The real men have to stand up and
Yeah,
say, that's it.
exactly.
Well,
And
yeah,
no
it's
one
about
wants that kind of responsibility to start that kind of a fight, because it's going to be a fight. It's going to be a physical fight to some degree, and no one wants to start that fight. We've all been kicking sand in each other's eyes, but no one wants to throw that first punch, you know. And they have been throwing punches. When you start indicting people for that, that's a punch. That's a punch to half, and it's way more than half of the American people. When you see our leader being treated like a human punching bag year after year after year,
Yeah.
and he can't be bought, and that's the fucking problem with him. So
I wanted to answer Brian's question because I kind of
Sure.
dodged it.
Okay.
You know, Brian said, "What do we do?" This battle that we're up against, and it's not a popular notion today in our godless world, but this is spiritual warfare. The World Economic Forum, the UN, the World Health, they are serving a master. And I'm telling you, you're going to have to pick a side. And
I feel you.
if you're thinking this life is the end, if everything's about preserving what we have in this life, this world, there's someone in the Bible referred to as the prince of this world. This is Satan's world that we're living in. And if we're fighting to get back what Satan created, we're bowing down to the wrong image. This tear down that's happening, this tear down, God isn't allowing it to happen. What I'm saying, people are asking, why doesn't God stop this? Why isn't God stepping in?
Yeah.
God is letting this happen. God used the Assyrians to punish Israel, the Babylonians to punish Judah. He's using the World Economic Forum to punish us because we've all fallen in love with our idols. And God's saying, no, I come first. So, and I know this is not a religious podcast.
Oh no, I'm fully behind you. This
I
is
know,
a good
Brian,
versus
I know
evil.
Yeah.
We're talking about good versus evil, and that covers a lot of religions and a lot of thought processes, and I think it's totally legitimate.
Totally. I think that we're, you know, what you see the depth of how, you know, when we look at, you know, the elites and what they're doing, and, you know, not just this agenda, but, you know, all the horrors that we know about, that we've heard about. It's clearly a spiritual war. It's like this is the moment in history where we have to stand up to this. We have to. It's a spiritual war.
And if you're looking,
And
if
For
you're,
the souls of humanity.
if you think, you know, Americans, a lot of Americans tend to think, oh, well, Donald Trump will send it crashing down. Canadians are saying, oh, Pierre Poilievre, he'll send it all crashing down. Some people like Elon Musk, they say, oh, he's gonna, you know, stick an eye and he's gonna poke them in the eye, and we're gonna get our, and that if you're looking for a savior, a prophet, a Messiah, you're good. There are going to be a lot of false ones out there that people are going to latch themselves onto, thinking that they're going to be the one who's going to send it all crashing down, and everyone's going to be disappointed.
well, if you have a serious civil war, like something similar happened in the 80s in Colombia, did it not? All out information psyop just sent them into like a civil war for like 10 years.
Yep.
And it just devastated them, you know. So if you've got 30% of the population really living in some altered narrative, you know, world where, you know, censorship is okay and this is okay and all this is okay, 30% is a lot of people. I mean, yeah, we're gonna win, but that would be an ugly, messy, nasty thing that would just really devastate and cripple us for a very long time. So what really frustrates me the most is what we learned is that all of these problems can be fixed easily and quickly. And that's the most heartbreaking thing of all is I grew up thinking the economy was so fucked up it couldn't be fixed. Well, there are companies like, or there are countries like Iceland that had all of this corruption and their economy was completely out of control. And they're said, well, you created this debt and this debt, and this isn't our debt, and this isn't our debt, and you're going to jail and you're going to jail, and our economy's fine now. And how do you like that? Done. I mean, if you take out all the corruption and you take out all the dollars that were made illegitimately, oh, I bet you the engine will just start running just fine again. What I thought was, I was just noticing with my family, we're thinking back to Ronald Reagan, back in those times, and he was coming in, high inflation, problems in the Middle East, all kinds of problems that frankly Jimmy Carter had created, and Democrat policy had created, And I remember being a kid and I saw Saturday Night Live and they would do Ronald Reagan well, Nancy well, and they portrayed him as like an idiot. And I grew up thinking the guy was stupid. And then I grow up to find out that he came in and pretty much didn't trust the government at all. What did he say? The 10 scariest words: I'm from the government and I'm here to help you, and he thought that the government was so big and out of control that was actually the core problem, and that people themselves shouldn't look at the government to solve their problems. They could do a far better job just taking it on themselves, no matter what it is. And he turned out to be like the smartest one of them all in all those years because of mainstream media. I thought he was stupid,
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you got Bush on his left, lurking behind him, plotting his, the New World Order itself.
Points of light.
New World Order.
Yeah.
So this thing's been brewing a long time.
Oh, decades.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing now is push coming to shove. Is it going to be able to take down America? And I don't just mean America. It's America, Canada, England, and the good guys that are still standing.
France, yeah, you name it.
England, the Brexit wouldn't have happened if there weren't some good guys still over there.
Yeah.
There are.
The Americans, because of your constitution, because of your state rights.
Yeah.
It's been said before, you're the beacon on the hill.
Yeah. I was going to say, I mean, we all look to your
We wouldn't be here without our guns. They would have kicked our ass a long time.
Which is part of your constitution, right? Now they're trying to take them away in Canada.
Even hunting rifles.
Hunting rifles included. So,
there are no hunting rifles. They're all assault rifles now.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
They've changed. They're playing around with the definitions so that even a simple hunting rifle can be designated as an assault rifle.
Yeah. And see, they gave us a chart of rights, which actually is just a Trojan horse, because they have a clause that basically says that in emergency measures, it no
longer applies.
It doesn't apply. Whereas the Bill of Rights is the one that you got to apply. I had a couple of court cases that I was supposed to go to for the tickets that I got, and I basically wrote down I'm adhering to the Bill of Rights, and also I put rescission, like I do not contract with this. And so far, I haven't heard anything from them on that. So the Bill of Rights, in fact, when I even mentioned it to the judge when I had my first hearing, they said, "Oh, the Bill of Rights." They tried to play stupid with me. I couldn't believe what I was like. You don't know what the Bill of Rights is?
The Bill of Rights, but you need to let Americans know before
in the court system.
No,
you grow up and you find that shit, and you're like, no wonder the world's so screwed up. You never thought that could ever happen as a kid. Oh, the Bill of Rights. What the hell are you talking about? What? Gosh, you gotta be
Ian isn't
kidding.
talking about the American Bill of Rights. We have a Bill of Rights in Canada that predates our Constitution.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
Our Constitution wasn't signed until 1981 or 1982. And
But to
that's,
pretend he doesn't know, I mean,
Oh,
give
yeah.
me a
That's
break. I
crazy.
mean, oh, geez.
Yeah.
I've got an early morning tomorrow.
Oh yeah. We'll end it
Well, it's
here,
been
you
a-
know.
yeah, gentlemen, it's been
You
great.
guys want
But
to keep going? I'm gonna tap
No,
out.
we're good. Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right.
well,
Thanks.
we'll call this our conspiracy group because this turned into something else. And you know
Yeah.
what? We're with you guys, and you know we even did some news things, me and Mark. You know, and we might even still do some more stuff. So let's all keep in touch
Yeah.
because we're on the same page. And you know what's cool,
Yeah.
guys? We came here for one reason to talk about the fires. And it turned into really the core problem of the world.
Yeah.
And that just shows you 4 random guys get together. None of us got fucked up by the mainstream media. None of
No,
us.
not at all.
Not
Yeah.
one person here is been
Mhm.
fully damaged. And you know, maybe that's a trend that maybe we're ignoring and a sign that God's watching us and
Yeah.
and things are going to be okay. But I had a lot of fun talking to you guys. Really great.
Well,
Same here.
pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank
Ian,
you.
it was
Oh,
great
and
seeing you again.
before I get
No,
both of you off, I know you got to go, Gordon, but
No, no.
funny story is, you know, I was at the beach, and I'm not going to the beach to brag. I'm going because, you know, if they do a climate lockdown, I want to explore this place. So I'm over at Surf City Topsail Beach. You know, I don't know what they call it. It's Surf City or Topsail Island. There's a shirt there, and I'm like, these guys would love it. It says like Topsail Island or Surf City. It says no laws here. So I had to ask her. I'm like, is that the truth? I'll move here tomorrow if there's no laws. And she's like, no, this is just, she goes, that's just figuratively speaking, because when you're at the beach, there's no laws you have to abide by. I was like, oh,
Very
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah,
We-
people are not obeying laws, and I'm pissed about that
Yeah.
actually. But that's another video, guys, and we'll
Oh,
talk
yeah.
again. It was a
Appreciate
pleasure,
it.
gentlemen.
Thanks a lot.
Have a